Story 1. Felt like no time passed at all. 1 second I was unconscious, the next second I was waking up. No dreams, no awareness, just nothingness. Story 2. Spent several days in a medically induced coma after brain surgery years ago. I remember becoming about a quarter of the way conscious a few times when I was poked or prodded during examinations. I would hear the conversations but could not feel any real sensation, as if my entire body had gone to sleep. I had no ability to move my body or to speak. I sometimes wonder if that was a false memory. I had some really weird and very vivid dreams for a couple of weeks afterward and had difficulty maintaining short-term memories for at least a month. Story 3. Thank you for posting this. Not only have the responses been interesting to read, but they have been helpful to me. My sister died during a coma following a suicide attempt, and I have always wondered what slipping into that must have felt like for her. I hope she is at peace. Story 4. For me, it was a deep, dreamless sleep. I was not aware of anything external. I woke up a week later and did not know who I was or who my family was. Story 5. My husband was in a medically induced coma last summer. He remembered being in the house, then it was dark, and suddenly he was lying in a hospital bed. It had been almost 5 days. Story 6. I was in a coronavirus ventilator coma. I do not remember going under, but I remember frantically calling my fiancée to say goodbye, thinking it was for the last time. I do not remember dreaming or hearing anything for 2 weeks. When I came out, I was very confused and did not remember much for a day or two. I lost the ability to walk for a week, had no hand-eye coordination, and could barely operate my phone. I developed stage 4 pressure ulcers, also known as bed sores, which took 4 years to heal. Apparently, I would wake up and try to remove my breathing tube occasionally. Story 7. This is off subject, but I had a friend who was in a coma for a week, and it was right before September 11th. He woke up a week after September 11th. I cannot imagine how strange that must have been. Story 8. I don't remember much about it. I was on so many painkillers that I doubt I felt anything. I woke up 4 days later. There is a lot to the story, but that basically answers the question. Story 9. I was out for about 8 weeks after being run over by a truck. I have no memory of the accident or the 8 weeks I was unconscious. I woke up barely able to move my arms and legs due to muscle atrophy. I was in and out of consciousness for the next couple of months. Some of the lucid dreams were horrifying. I did not want to fall asleep on some days because the dreams seemed to last for days. I was told I talked a lot in my sleep. Story 10. Medically induced coma for 2 weeks. I woke up on the other side of the country, not knowing where I was or what happened. The last thing I remember is walking into the doctor's office 2 weeks earlier. It just felt like waking up from another nap, then being told I have a brain disease. Story 11. My husband was out for nearly a month. He has no memory of it. Once he woke up, he was still on a ventilator for another week. During that time, he had vivid dreams about being kidnapped and struggling to get free. He underwent emergency surgery for a small bowel obstruction, and complications progressed into respiratory failure and sepsis. Story 12. Not much. I felt like you do when awakening from a long, deep sleep when they brought me around after an induced coma. Story 13. I was in a coma for 2 weeks because of asthma earlier this summer. It was horrible. I was on ketamine and fentanyl. I would periodically understand what was going on. Like, oh, I am lying down and unable to move or blink. What happened? Then the delusions started. I had the strongest, most realistic delusions, trying to figure out what I was hearing on the outside. I thought I was in a terrible car accident and was thrown through my car windshield. I thought my mom died in the accident. I thought I texted my family and friends. None of it was real. There is obviously much more I am not revealing. But yes, I do not recommend it. Story 14. I was aware of my surroundings, but I could not interact. I would fade in and out, from present to another world. I was at peace and felt no physical or emotional pain. At times, I could hear people talking to me. Story 15. I don't know if I was in a coma. I cut my knee, and 3 days later I was hospitalized for 6 weeks. When I arrived at the emergency room, My liver and kidneys were showing signs of shutting down. I had a septic reaction. I was almost dead and don't remember the first month aside from a feeling of dread and extreme exhaustion. My leg was solid even while trying to walk to the bathroom. I felt random glimpses of darkness and heard random sounds until I stabilized. Then, I mostly slept for the first 4 weeks as the intravenous antibiotics stabilized me. Story 16. I was going under for brain surgery. The anesthetist asked if I would like a song playing. Party rock anthem was playing at the time. I said I did not care. I was told they count backwards from 5. 3. I was gone. The next thing I remember, a nurse was cleaning the blood off my face in recovery. It ruined Party Rock Anthem. For me. Not that I ever liked that song in the first place. Story 17. Had a subdural hematoma with midline shift. I hit the ground pretty hard. It happened on Saturday, and I woke up from the coma on Wednesday. I tried to ask the doctors and my family questions about what happened to me but couldn't talk due to aphasia. I was just trapped in my head. It drove me crazy, and I became very aggressive toward everyone, including the nurses. I apologized to the nurses and healthcare workers. The coma was complete blackness, just nothing at all. Story 18. I had a severe case of toxin poisoning. It was terrible. I had so much abdominal pain and vomited so much that I eventually brought up bile from my liver. I was given high doses of injections to stop the vomiting, but to everyone's surprise, I continued to vomit. To stop the pain, I was given painkillers repeatedly before I was finally placed into an induced coma to allow time for treatment and to give my body a break. The coma was uneventful. When I woke up 6 days later, I was shocked that so much time had passed since I last remembered. I was amazed that work was taken care of by someone else and that someone had stayed by my bedside while I was unconscious. I also missed watching a soccer game I had been waiting to see for over a month. Aside from the shock of the 6-day gap, I experienced a strange throbbing headache and felt hungry but did not want to eat anything. Nothing else. Story 19. Had a stroke in the brain at age 17. It was a very long and vivid dream. I dreamt that I was in a park with a pond in the middle, and there were lots of children playing around. A black bear appeared and approached the children, and in the next scene, I saw a thick branch lodged in my arm. Then I woke up. Story 20. This whole thread scares me, and to everyone who is sharing stories, I am sorry you had to go through that. I love you, and I am glad you are all here. Story 21. My father-in-law was in an accident when he was 18 and was in a 4-month coma. He does not remember anything. The last thing he remembered was getting into the car. The next thing he knew was 4 months later in the hospital. A coma is an interesting condition. The body decides that it is too damaged to be conscious unless the coma is medically induced. It diverts all power to maintenance and recovery. Story 22. I can distinctly remember being in a completely dark space. There was a man in a tuxedo playing a cello and a woman in a white dress playing a violin. They were performing Pachelbel's Canon in D on a loop while I hovered there. It did not seem like it lasted very long, but I was unconscious for 4 or 5 days. That is the only memory I have from that time. Story 23. I shot myself in the head once and was unconscious for 4 days. Took me years to even remember that day. Zero memory. I am still not convinced that I am in the same life. Story 24. It's nothingness. Then waking to everything. Even now, I can't tell the difference in the immediacy of waking up and several days later what are my memories and what are just my memories of people telling me what was going on. Does that make sense? Story 25. I was in a coma for about a month after getting methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus pneumonia. I have at least a month of coma memories, especially because they were all connected. Felt like I was living day after day. There was no jumping around, just one event after another. These are the clearest and most complete memories I have. They seem to be influenced by things people said around me. I did not hear those things as voices or anything direct, but they did seem to inspire events. Story 26. I was on extracorporeal membrane oxygenation and thought I had died. I felt like my whole life was gone and now I was dead. I also remember thinking my husband had hooked me up to some artificial intelligence device. When I woke up to ask him, he had no idea what I was talking about. Story 27. No memory whatsoever. Woke up in a hospital bed after a car accident that could have killed me. Computed tomography scan showed no damage, miraculously. The hardest part was getting a catheter put in because it was not safe for me to walk yet. And the recovery. I slept for 14 to 16 hours per day for an entire summer because of it. Brains are delicate. Having one that works is such a gift. Story 28. I could feel myself fighting with everything I had to wake up. Of course, there are many different severity levels to traumatic injuries. Story 29. Like a deep sleep. Woke up about 8 days later and was really confused. Family was very worried I was not going to come back. I died for a bit in the initial moment. Story 30. My grandfather slipped into a coma and doctors were unable to find any indicators that he was not in a vegetative state. After 3 to 4 hours, the doctors informed us. Grandfather had said he did not want to be kept on a machine, so we all prepared to say goodbye that night. I was the last one to go in. I held his hand and spoke to him. Something inside me remembered reading that in a coma, the last sense to go is hearing. I told him to come back to me, begged him to come back to me, to come home. He came out of his coma 30 minutes later. A couple of months later, I asked him about the coma. Grandfather said it was peaceful and there was a light he was gravitating toward, but he heard me say, "Come back to me, please." He heard me beg and decided to follow my voice, and there he was, awake. Unfortunately, the second time around, about 4 years later during COVID-19, he did not make it. But I am comforted knowing he heard me tell him it was okay to let go, that I loved him and I was not angry. Rest in peace. You were the greatest man alive to me. Story 31. I have the same vivid auditory memory of hearing my mother talking while I was in a coma whenever I tell a story about my experience. My memory has selected that moment for long-term storage. I could hear the nurses talking and my mother talking, but not consciously. It was like the parents in Charlie Brown. Story 32. Not me, but my mother had a brain aneurysm and was very lucky to survive. She was in a coma for a week. When she woke up, she thought she had been in a pub playing pool with two good friends who had died a year before, not my brother who died 2 years earlier. I like to think they were keeping her company and entertained while she was in between. Story 33. Deep sleep. A few vivid fever dreams, but mostly nothingness. Blackness. I remember making the choice of which door to walk through, life or death, before the blackness. Story 34. Like taking 100 hits of acid, having a bad trip, and not knowing you took acid. I was comatose for 4 to 6 weeks. It is hard to say exactly how long, as I was never a 3 on the coma scale. Anything below an 8 is considered comatose. I experienced vivid hallucinations, trippy nightmare worlds of medical experiments and extreme body horror. Story 35. I was in a ketamine-induced coma for 3 weeks. It was an existential nightmare. I saw demons, died in my head, and was reincarnated through a series of tests where I was guided by a guardian angel. I hallucinated about an ocean of demons for 2 weeks after I woke up. I had so many dreams. I destroyed my hospital room, attacked nurses, and would rip my intubation tube out, even biting through it once. I ripped my intravenous lines and electrocardiogram tabs off trying to escape. I destroyed every breathing mask in the hospital that fit me. I remember hanging halfway off the hospital bed after ripping everything off and hearing the machine flatline. I was upside down, watching the intensive care unit staff try to get dressed on time to come in and save me while I was gasping for air. It was during COVID-19, so they had to wear all their safety gear. Story 36. My father was in an induced coma for 2 weeks. When he came back, he was severely confused for 1 to 2 weeks because his dreams felt like real-life scenarios. First, he dreamed he went back to the early 1900s with horse carriages and a snowy Adelaide, even though it has never snowed there. Second, he dreamed that he was caught selling drugs. There were many police involved, and my niece was present, so when he came back, he was very apologetic to her. I am not sure if the coma induced this dream, but there was an assault and murder that happened, and some of the victims were in the same emergency department. My thought is that he could hear the commotion from the police, and the nurses may have been gossiping around my father while he was unconscious. Story 37. Nothing went to sleep and woke up a few weeks later. I thought it was the same day but later in the day. I went into the hospital on a Monday at 2 a.m. and woke up on a Thursday at 4 p.m. weeks later. Story 38. I was in a medically induced coma for about a week. Most of my memories of it are fuzzy, but I know that I dreamt another life long enough to be confused about who I was once I awoke. I recognized everyone I knew in real life, but it was like having another set of memories forced upon me. It took me another week or so to settle into myself. Story 39. I didn't know I was in a coma until I woke up. I heard everything going on around me. I just couldn't speak. It is almost like a bad dream you are trying to wake up from. So I tell everyone to talk to your loved ones, but do not discuss major medical issues or any decisions you are planning because we hear you. Story 40. How do you know that you are not in a coma now and this is all just a figment of your imagination? Story 41. Medically induced coma from intense seizures. I remember only about 2 seconds from the ambulance ride to the hospital. I woke up about 3 weeks later. I internally recognized my friends and family when I woke up but could not name them or communicate that I knew them until a few days after waking up. Story 42. I was in a medically induced coma for nearly 2 months. I dreamed, but I do not know if the dreams were about me waking up or from the coma. The only thing I knew was that I was shocked when I was told the date and remembered when I went to the hospital. Story 43. Instantly like going to sleep without dreaming. Woke up 16 days later as if only a moment had passed but 70 pounds lighter. Story 44. I woke up in a hospital bed with intravenous lines and all kinds of equipment around me with no recollection of it happening. It was just like a deep, dreamless sleep. I had a skiing accident and suffered for a few days before having seizures, then being put into a medically induced coma. I have no idea how long it lasted and time flew by. It was painless at the time, and the whole incident feels like a dream. Story 45. I was in a medically induced coma for 10 days due to multiple organ failure caused by sepsis. I suffered 3 recurring nightmares from which I was unable to wake. The first nightmare was in a dark, doorless warehouse filled with grandfather clocks, each illuminated by a spotlight. I was being chased around the warehouse, hiding behind clocks from 2 people with knives. The second nightmare was like playing your daily life as a game. Every time someone spoke to you, you had several options to pick from. If you chose the wrong option, you had to restart the game. This worsened as you progressed because the buildings were on fire, and restarting the game did not restart the fire. Felt like a race against time. The third nightmare was on a bullet train in Japan. I was restrained with no use of my hands, arms, or legs. I could feel myself slowly suffocating. Yet everyone around was talking and going about their day, completely ignoring me. In all of these, I never died or got caught. It still makes me wonder what would have happened if I had. For me, these nightmares were always recurring, and I was never able to shake myself awake. It was the worst experience of my life. Upon finally waking, I was delirious for a week before understanding where I was or why. Story 46. I was unconscious for 5 days. I do not recall having any dreams, but everything felt calm. I faded into consciousness a couple of times and apparently tried to speak a few times. I was not sure if I had died. They administered varying levels of sedation depending on what procedures they were performing, such as a computed tomography scan, emergency surgery, or resting in the intensive care unit. I woke up quite confused about where I was and did not realize how much time had passed, a sensation similar to general anesthesia. I also experienced retrograde amnesia. I forgot most of what happened in the emergency room, although I was apparently there for a couple of hours and conscious. All I remember is being wheeled into the emergency room and the awake fiber optic intubation, which I strongly do not recommend. Like most others, I had sepsis in critical condition. Story 47. It did not feel like anything. I just woke up 6 days later and had no memory of what had happened immediately before I went under. Story 48. This happened once in my life in 2023. I am type 1 diabetic and I caught an infection unknowingly which put me into diabetic ketoacidosis, triggering a diabetic coma. The last thing I remember is sitting on a step in my room, trying to stand up, then violently falling. Felt like my legs couldn't support my weight and they gave out. The next thing I remember is hearing my dad's voice in my ear and feeling him stroke my hair. I heard machines and lots of noise around me and realized I was in the hospital, but I had no recollection of how I got there. It was like a complete time jump because during this time I had no thoughts or memories. It was not like falling asleep and dreaming. I completely lost track of time and had no recollection of going from point A, being in my bedroom, to point B, being there. The doctors tried asking me a series of questions: my name, age, what year it was. I gave the wrong year and tried to correct myself but couldn't say it accurately. I ended up getting sepsis. It was a surreal experience. I spent over a week in the intensive care unit. I am grateful my dad decided to check on me. He said I was on the floor, at the side of my bed, naked, with my tongue sticking out and labored breathing. Story 49. I was in a medically induced coma for about 2 weeks after an accident. During that time, it felt like I was reliving my entire life but fast-forwarded, as if it was all playing on a screen at 2 to 3 times normal speed. This happened in 1999. As I began waking up, I felt like a baby again, and my first thought was that I had been reborn but retained memories from my past life. At that point, I did not remember my accident. When I was more awake, I couldn't talk because of a tube in my throat. I remember being in a hospital bed, feeling like a baby, though I was actually 13. I was trying to wave someone down. In my mind, I felt like an advanced newborn. It was like a movie dream sequence that speeds up until the person awakens. That's how it felt when I became fully awake. I realized I was myself, in a hospital bed, waving down a nurse. Once she saw me, I saw my parents' faces, and everyone was so happy to see me awake. Looking back, some of the things I was reliving were actually conversations and events happening around me, but my mind somehow mixed them into my memories. It was very strange and something only someone who has been through it can understand. Story 50. I cannot tell you what it was like during the coma, but I can tell you what it was like after. I had really bad pneumonia in May 2013 that I assumed was just the flu, so I went to the grocery store for more medicine. I did not make it 3 steps before I hit the ground. When I woke up from the coma, it felt like no time had passed at all, and being told it was now June was jarring, to say the least. I died the day I went to the grocery store, and 12 years later, I still remember the day I woke up like it was yesterday. The coma was an 8 out of 10, but I do not recommend the catheter. Story 51. I felt like I was trapped inside my own body. I could hear and feel everything, which was very frightening. I was in a medically induced coma for a month. Story 52. 5-day medically induced coma. Like the others, there was nothing. I woke up briefly with my hands tied. I remember making troll sounds to protest and then passed out again. When I really came to, the tie-downs were gone, and I felt really confused. Turns out they gave me morphine, and I scratched myself severely while unconscious. Prior to this, I was internally bleeding to death. Before I passed out, there was a heavy static sound and feeling in my head. I felt like I was about to float, but I crashed to the floor. Story 53. It did not feel like anything. I woke up and did not realize that I had been in a coma for a week until they told me. Story 54. I was in a coma for 6 weeks. I had caught methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, and it was really bad. I had nightmares, and it was terrifying. All I am going to say is there is a God. Story 55. I was in a medically induced coma for several days. I was aware that I was alive, but I could not feel my body, sense my surroundings, or anything else. It felt like being in a vacuum, which was a scary experience. Story 56. Oh my gosh, it felt just like yesterday, way back in February 2011. After I gave birth through cesarean section, I had a pulmonary embolism that put me in the intensive care unit on a ventilator and life support. I was told I was in a coma for 3 days, but I remember it vividly. I was just staring at the wall. All I could see was white, and the heads of people were sleeping. I was just there. Then I woke up 3 days later and felt suffocated with the endotracheal tube in my mouth. I was struggling wildly to get it off, but my hands and feet were tied down. Then it hit me that I was still alive. Every day is a blessing. Let's be grateful. Story 57. I had a coworker who was in a medically induced coma for 3 months. He said it was like being in a very long, very vivid dream. The worst part was waking up and realizing he had lost 3 months of his life. Story 58. I do not remember anything about it. But the strange part is how short 9 days actually is, and what an impact it still had. I could not even walk. And that was just after 9 days. Story 59. The first time I was ever admitted to a hospital was in 2020. I was put in a medically induced coma for 4 days after several days of not being able to breathe, spending a total of 3 weeks in the intensive care unit. I woke up during intubation and struggled against it. Recall certain conversations around me afterward. I think they did not properly dose me. During, or maybe toward the end when I was coming back, I had horrible nightmares with an orange tint. I dreamt someone was hiding me and pulling on my arms, which I believe was the nurses turning me. When I woke up, I was still paralyzed and did not remember why I was unable to move. I could not open my eyes but could hear doors opening and closing. I do not know how long I was like that, but it was very upsetting and made me question whether I would ever be normal again. When I was able to open my eyes, I was frightened for a few hours. They explained what had happened several times as I kept forgetting and losing consciousness. Eventually, when the drugs wore off and they removed the tube, I began to make sense of things. I am still scared about going to the hospital and undergoing procedures. During my last 2 procedures, the anesthesiologist had to coax me with Valium and assure me I would wake up fine. Those events were much easier and felt like normal time jumps others have described. I avoid hospitals at all costs because I do not like the sounds of the machines. Story 60. Had a stroke after giving birth. Had no idea I was in a medically induced coma. Came to in the ambulance on my way to Houston. Was in a coma for about 6 weeks. Story 61. A short medically induced coma is similar to being asleep but without dreams. Some people have also died and been brought back, which is like sleeping with no dreams. There are no pearly gates. Story 62. Echoing many people's stories about anesthetics, I look at the clock to remember the time, give a wave to the doctors, close my eyes, and tell them that I will see them on the other side. Almost instantly, I know I am waking up feeling groggy and not completely present. The first thing I do when I wake up, if I cannot see the clock, is ask for the time, which is usually a couple of hours or a bit longer later. It feels as if time never passed for me, at least not in my perception. It scares me in a way that I can blink and just lose time. Story 63. I was in a coma for 3 weeks. I had multiple organ failure and septicemia. When I woke up, I had developed something called critical illness polyneuropathy. It basically meant all my muscles were severely weakened, so my brain shut down all non-essential functions to keep me alive. For the first month of being awake, I don't remember much. I had a tracheostomy because of my lungs failing. After about a month, I started moving a bit, and 3 years later, I am alive, working part-time, and most of all, the damage has healed to a certain degree. My memory isn't great, and I have trouble concentrating and learning, but I survived. Story 64. I was in an induced coma for about 24 hours after being resuscitated due to an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. I have no memories of the coma or the immediate time after coming out of it. I just remember not being shocked about being in the hospital but not really knowing why. Mostly, I remember the pain from coughing due to pneumonia that I developed either from the resuscitation or the coma. My chest was very sore. Story 65. My wife was put into an induced coma for 3 weeks in 2016. She caught the flu, which then progressed to multiple organ failure. She describes it as a dreamless sleep in a void of emptiness. She had no concept of self or time. It sounds ultimately horrifying to me. Story 66. I was in a coma for 5 days from alcohol poisoning after drinking liquor for the first time. I felt and saw nothingness, like being in a deep sleep. I woke up more exhausted than I had ever felt. Story 67. I was in a coma for just over 4.5 months due to a ruptured pancreas and multiple organ failure. I remember nothing during the coma, But in the weeks following, I experienced extremely vivid nightmares. They still haunt me to this day, 10 years on. Story 68. Medically induced coma for nearly a week. It was like nothing, just a void I slipped into. That said, I think there were 1 or 2 times they reduced the sedation. I have a brief memory of being in some medical imaging, either magnetic resonance imaging or computed tomography, and a nurse speaking to me about Jesus. As an atheist, I felt annoyed by that, but don't know whether I actually voiced my objection or just thought it. The second time was when they were bringing me out of the coma. My mouth was so dry, but I had something down my throat that made it impossible to ask the nurses for a drink. When I was fully awake, I was pretty angry, thirsty, and upset my suicide attempt didn't work. I'm pretty sure I yelled at the nurse, who was so sweet and well-meaning. I feel ashamed about that even now, years later. I was also suffering from psychosis, which had me hearing voices coming from an air conditioning unit. Those were not my finest moments. After I was discharged, I returned to bring flowers to the nurses who cared for me even when I was difficult and apologized. Story 69. Wild story for me. I'm type 1 diabetic, and at 16 it caused me to have a heart attack. Makes me skeptical of some of the answers here, as there are a few things I remember that happened. The first memory is from before it happened, where I went to the bathroom. I have no memory of the heart attack or anything during it. I just remember feeling terrible, lying on the bathroom tiles. I was in a medically induced coma for a week, once taken into the intensive care unit as I had apparently been out for a while and had to be resuscitated. The doctors keep a diary of what happens during the days you're unconscious, so when you wake up, you can have it read to you to give you some semblance of time. Visitors who came, your state of health, things that were done to you, etc. People saying a dreamless sleep is confusing to me. I had several dreams that I'd consider nightmares, yet they were impossible to wake up from. Some involved the people around me, so putting 2 and 2 together, I believe they tried to bring me out of the coma at some point, but it was very stressful and I panicked. I tried to pull a tube out of my throat, flailing around, so they put me back under. During this time, I must have seen one of the nurses treating me, as I then had nightmares about her. It was very scary waking officially then seeing her, because I was terrified of her and what she did to me in those nightmares. People saying they were out for 2 weeks with no dreams, no recollection or anything. I am skeptical about that because I vividly remember these nightmares to this day. There are a lot of physical side effects that come with it too. A small example is muscles in your legs degrading, so even after a week, you need to teach your legs to walk again. That took a few days and needed support to do so. Happy to answer any questions, as it's a unique experience I've gone through, one I've never met anyone else having, especially at my age at the time. I'm nearly 30 now, for perspective. Story 70. I'm sure everyone has a different feeling. My wife found me on the bathroom floor naked, acting like it wasn't me. She rushed me to the hospital. They said my kidneys and all of my organs were shutting down, and they didn't know what was happening. They finally diagnosed me with acute respiratory distress syndrome. At the time, I had just been diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis, and my doctor wanted to start heavy treatment with Remicade. I also had the flu at the time, but I was never checked. I spent 2 weeks in a coma, and I don't remember anything before it happened. Felt like someone pulled me out of a ball pit, and then I was awake. I still don't remember much, and this was back in 2016. The blessing in disguise was that I smoked for more than 30 years, but when I woke up from the coma, I didn't feel the urge to smoke. I haven't had a cigarette in 9 years, and I don't miss it at all. I am actually having hip surgery at the end of September. It will be the first time since I was in a coma. It's a scary feeling. Story 71. It felt like time just stopped existing, and so did I. I have no recollection, no sense of existence during that time. I woke up unaware that any time had passed. Story 72. When I was 18, I was in a car accident and had a head injury. I do not remember 1 to 2 weeks before the accident. 3 weeks later, I slowly became aware of my surroundings, such as the color of the walls in my hospital room, the ride to the rehabilitation facility, and my family visiting. What does not kill you makes you stronger. Story 73. I had some incredible dreams. Some were disturbing. Being kidnapped by a group of drug traffickers, tortured, and threatened with decapitation. Others were more ordinary. Being in a hospital where the staff was preparing for a Harry Potter-themed Halloween party. I was septic. I was in a coma for 2 weeks and in the intensive care unit for a total of 5 weeks. The delusions I had when I was awake are even more inexplicable, to be honest. Story 74. I don't remember much, just being woken up before I was put in one. It was a traumatic experience afterward. Story 75. Medically induced coma for about 3 days. I was intubated and do not really remember them preparing me for it, only waking up with the tube down my throat and what felt like rubber rubbing against my teeth. Apparently, when they started to bring me out of it, I woke up a couple of times and tried to pull the tube out enough times that they had to tie my hands to the rails. I guess I asked my partner what happened to me through gestures. She explained, but then I became unconscious again. They gave me a lot of medication, and I could not really feel anything. When I was in the coma, I do not remember a single thing, only waking up. Story 76. I am reading some of the replies here and thinking you all must have excellent jobs, including insurance. Story 77. I have never been in a coma, but it is scary. People who were there respect you for getting out. Story 78. I have told my mother's story before, but to summarize, when she was 16, she was struck by a drunk driver. Her first boyfriend was killed, and she was in a coma for 6 months. Her body was shattered, her neck broken, and she was not supposed to survive. You would not know it looking at her today. She was expected to have been a lifelong vegetative patient if she somehow survived. Her parents gave away all her belongings. The main permanent effect of her accident is complete retrograde amnesia. She had to start over. What she told me is that after waking up from her coma, she was terrified because she recognized no one. When spoken to at first, she said, "It was like I should be able to understand them, but not quite." A man introduced himself as my doctor, and I was wondering what a doctor was. In essence, she had to relearn most things from the ground up. Some things felt like being reminded of something I had known once, but there was absolutely no recall of who she had been before. Any memory took decades before fragments of her childhood resurfaced. She recalls Dickie, her first boyfriend, and the day of the accident, but not the accident itself. Most of her childhood is permanently gone. How she made a complete physical recovery, aside from a few scars and partial dentures, baffled everyone. She should have been paralyzed from the neck down but was not. It was a true medical miracle. The one other issue that still appears from time to time is slight forgetfulness, but that is minor compared to what it could have been. They also told her she could not have children. She married and had 4 of us. She and I are both firmly convinced that if her parents had not given away or thrown out all her belongings, it might have helped her recall something from before. As it is, she had plenty of siblings to help assist in her recovery by reteaching her the basics of normal life. It is a shame they were all strangers to her for a very long time at first. She recalled nothing of them initially, and it took decades before bits and pieces started returning on their own. What she did get was the sense of, I should know these people somehow. I should love these people. So over time, she loved them all over again. With her world so shrunken and as supportive as they were, it was not very hard. Story 79. I was in a coma for a week. It was like I didn't exist during that time, like anesthesia but more intense. There is no you. Your body is present and you are not in it. If your body were not there, there would be no difference. You are nowhere else during that time. You are not in your body or in your mind. You simply do not exist. You never existed. There is no you to consider whether you are you or not you, or were once you or will be you again. You might as well have never existed at all. If you had never been born, there would be no difference in how completely you do not exist. It is not blackness. Blackness does not exist. It is not darkness. Darkness does not exist. It is not even nothing, because for there to be nothing, there must have once been something. There simply is not. Not you, not something, not nothing, just not. Oblivion, the void, the lack of existence. Trying to remember what it was like while I was in the coma is like trying to remember what it was like before I was born. I was very confused afterward, for weeks. All of my memories from before, and for a few months after, are very hazy, with the haziness decreasing more and more as time passes. It feels like they didn't happen to me, like they were a dream or happened to someone else. Interestingly, the way I think is very different now. I used to have an overactive inner narrator. Now I don't have one at all, except sometimes when I'm reading, writing, or making an effort to have one. I mainly think in concepts now and actually think much faster and more clearly and efficiently because of these changes. I prefer this. It has been about 5 years, so I imagine these changes are permanent, which I'm okay with. Story 80. I was in a coma for a few days after a severe asthma attack. I have never been able to make sense of that time. When I try to tell people what happened, everything becomes disorganized. Even now, I find it difficult to write sentences about it. Story 81. I was in a coma for 2 days. I remember fragments of things I heard. Other than that, just darkness like sleeping. I hit my head after falling off a bicycle. Story 82. Nothing. I did not know it happened until I woke up. It was only for a day or so. One moment I was taking a combination of my usual medications. The next I was very surprised to wake up in the hospital with my traumatized girlfriend. I still find it hard to accept that it happened. Story 83. I had an asthma attack when I was 12 years old and was in a coma for 3 days. I remember nothing from a few days before to a few days afterward except one clear memory of a nurse giving me orange juice. I do not recommend ever giving orange juice to someone who was recently forcefully intubated. Story 84. It was the longest dream I have ever had. It felt like I lived a year, and I woke up feeling like I was still in a dream because I was used to the other life. It took 3 to 4 days to come around, but I was also on the highest dose of fentanyl they could give a human while I was under for a month. Too long. Did not read, do not go 31 days without having a bowel movement. Story 85. I was in a medically induced coma for about a month. Felt like nothing, if that makes sense, almost dead but not. Just nothingness. No dreams, no memories, and no sense of time. Story 86. I was in a medically induced coma for 1 week. I did not feel anything. When I woke up, I thought it was the next day after I went into the hospital. My family had to tell me it was 1 week later. They told me about all the people who visited me. I do not remember any of it. Just nothing. Story 87. I hit my head and fractured my skull riding my bike home when I was 14. After I hit my head, I barely stumbled home and began throwing up. A few hours later, I blacked out on a medical helicopter to a larger hospital. I woke up 5 days later in critical care, surrounded by doctors at a university hospital. I had no memory of being unconscious. The doctors told me they lost me a few times and had to revive me in an ambulance and the airplane. I remember nothing, just a black void. I hit my head, then woke up about a week later feeling very unwell. I had to relearn many things. I would not recommend this experience. Wear a helmet, everyone. Story 88. I do not remember anything about it. I had a head injury in a car accident and did not wake up for a week. Story 89. I was in and out of one for around 2 weeks after a car accident. I unfortunately experienced one of the unpleasant side effects of being on sedatives for a long period of time. Intense nightmares and hallucinations. Some of the things my brain created were quite disturbing. Also, because it lasted several weeks, it felt like an eternity. One of the strangest parts was that it wasn't a continuous period, so trying to figure out when and what was real and what was a hallucination was quite challenging. Story 90. My wife was in a medically induced coma for 6 days. She had a long, nonsensical dream about losing control of her car, hitting a scarecrow, and avoiding being arrested. She says that toward the end, around day 5, she suddenly became aware that she might be dying and needed to wake up. Mostly, she says it felt like time traveling. She did not believe she had been unconscious for so long. It took months before her brain fully accepted that she had really missed a week and that we were not joking with her. What helped initially was that when they put her under, we were 1 to 2 days away from peak fall foliage. By day 6, when she woke up, the leaves had already fallen. Story 91. I was in a medically induced coma for 6 days. I had false memories when I woke up about how I got to the hospital. I lived a whole different life for a month in my mind. I quit my job, had a relationship. My brain even created a reason why I was in the hospital. It was absolutely wild. Couldn't walk. After the coma because my muscles had atrophied so much, and I lost about 15 pounds during the 9 days I was in the intensive care unit. I still have memories of my life while I was in the coma. It is very confusing. I also woke up with no back or neck pain, which are things I chronically struggle with. Story 92. I had Reye's syndrome 30 years ago and went into a coma for almost a week. I had no memory while in the coma. I just woke up in a hospital feeling like I had been hit by a truck and did not believe it was real for a while. Parents, do not give your children aspirin. Felt like nothing. Story 93. At age 5, I was in a coma for 20 days due to a traumatic brain injury from an all-terrain vehicle accident. While I currently have no actual memory of my time in the coma, I apparently told my family during my recovery that I had been with my maternal grandmother, who had died over a decade before I was born. I described her physical features and what she told me. My accident, coincidentally, occurred 18 years to the day of her passing. During my recovery in the hospital, I felt confused. I kept thinking I was in a hotel in Denver, about 850 miles from my home, the city where my family had vacationed a week before my accident. My confusion about my location also caused me to think, for a while, that the nurses were hotel maids. I maintained some sense of confusion and disconnect for months following my discharge from the hospital. I might even say that I still experience this to some extent over 40 years later. Story 94. No idea what it felt like while he was in the coma, but my father emerged from his month in an induced coma intellectually sharper than I have ever been. Just a few minutes of denying that I was his daughter because I was wearing a mask and dark glasses and was supposed to be on the other side of the world. Story 95. I was in a medically induced coma for 4 months. It was hell. I only remember panic and fear, but waking up was much worse. Story 96. I was in a coma for nearly a month. Felt like the best sleep of my life. I woke up to the news that my head was run over by a car, but the sleep was fantastic. It was medically induced to save my life. I woke up confused, with people staring at me, both surprised and relieved that I was awake. Story 97. I hit my head on the brick wall at a skating rink when I was 10. I remember hitting my head, then going to eat, and then collapsing at the table. I woke up 5 days later in the hospital with my family all there. I do not remember anything else in between. Story 98. I remember going under for a major surgery, wanting to watch an episode of The Walking Dead that night when I was supposed to wake up. When I did wake, the first thing I asked my stepdad was, "What time is it?" hoping I hadn't missed the episode yet. His response was, "Buddy, it's been a week." I was shocked, as I had no recollection of the time missed. In the end, I did get to watch the previous episode, as they always played last week's episode before the new one. It was crazy how a whole week went by without me noticing. Story 99. I was in a coma for a month. I hallucinated a place that did not exist. When people came to see me, they would be there with me in the world my mind created. There was always a little short man in the corner vigorously writing everything down. I asked if he could leave, and they said no, he belongs here. I was stuck with other people who could not move. The nurses had 24-hour shifts. It was a literal nightmare. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.